Duncan Rock, welcome to the Singing Teachers Talk podcast and to our 100th episode. How are you?
I'm well, and thank you for having me. And what an honor to be on the triple digit episode. I'm flattered to be your
Yes, you're very special. You're very special.
guest.
I'm just going to kick off by asking you, what is your foodie treat?
As in, what's my sort of naughty thing I don't ever admit to people?
Yeah.
Do you know what? I guess my number one is I love pizza. Of any kind, good, Neapolitan style, sort of, trendy pizza, or even like a Pizza Hut. It's the thing I can't go without, at least once in a while. It's my kind of number one.
I like it. A savory person. I'm the same. Well, mine is crisps, and I like to think of myself like a bit of a crisp connoisseur, if you like.
Oh wow. Do you go to like a crisp tasting, like a tasting menu of
Yes, I would love that. It's not just stuck to the Walkers and the Pringles. We go to kettle chips, we go to Tyrrells. We've got the palate for a crisp in this household.
what's the best crisp?
I don't think there is a best crisp.
Okay,
It's
they're all
needs
good.
to suit the scenario that you're in, I think. So, I mean, right now, lentil crisps are quite good. Proper, I think, is the brand. They're very good.
Okay.
A little snackette. But if you're going in, if you want something dirty, you need like a kettle chip, like this sour cream and chili
Yeah.
red packet. Absolutely divine.
I love it. Do you know, I mean, I say pizza, but I could have said one of many, many things that I enjoy
Yeah.
eating. But I can't have crisps in the house, if I'm honest. I could eat them all. I don't think there's a limit to my crisp eating abilities.
No. And it's not, don't get a bowl. Just put your hand straight in the sharing
Yeah.
packet and go
No,
for
that's a
it.
serving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Just
Yeah.
cross out the family part of that sentence and you're fine. But for many people, that treat is going to be chocolate. And it's kind of part of our lifestyle. We have it for birthdays. We've had Valentine's Day, Easter's coming up. We get loads of it at Christmas. It's like Tuesday nights or whenever chocolate's going to be part of our life. But singers, however, seem to have developed this ritual of avoidance. I never eat chocolate before I sing. And I took a quick Google using the search, should I eat chocolate before I sing? And I just wanted to kind of read out some of the things that popped up.
Sure.
So, this is some of the advice. The high sugar and caffeine content of chocolate can badly impact your vocal cords. The natural caffeine content will dry you out and constrict the muscles around the vocal cords.
Okay.
It can create mucus. It coats
Okay.
the back of the throat. It gives you more phlegm and a flatter sounding voice. So, before we dig into that, where has this idea come from that we shouldn't eat chocolate before we sing?
Yeah, it's it's a funny one because it's simultaneously really complicated and really simple. Sorry to start with a conundrum like that, or something it doesn't really make sense, but it, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said there's a ritual of avoidance. I think it sort of has developed a culture of suffering for one's art, perhaps on one hand, and also maybe I think there can be a bit of a performative aspect to it. I think singers, in my experience, and I mean this with wonderful respect, I love singers. Singers are my people, but a bit of a performative aspect to it. Oh no, I can't have dairy. I have rehearsals today. Oh, I have performance tonight. A bit of an opportunity to talk about what oneself and what we're up to as a singer. Absolutely fine. I don't mean it as a criticism, but I think there's definitely a performative aspect to the culture of it. In terms of the actual physiological, nutritional reality, there's very little evidence that I know you mentioned specifically chocolate, but obviously chocolate is a dairy product, and so it all tends to stem from avoidance or fear of dairy products. Interesting that the things that seem to stand out from your Google search were caffeine, sugar, and this idea of mucus. So dairy, milk, yogurt, cheese, chocolate, whatever, does not create mucus. This is just a myth. I don't know exactly who invented it, but there's no evidence for it. It doesn't create mucus, and there isn't even. It's not even really a hypothesis. There's no proposed mechanism of how dairy could create mucus. It's just a notion. People think it's what happens. Dairy, milk particularly, but any dairy product, and the further away you get from just standard milk, the less this becomes relevant. But milk is an emulsion, which means it's fat droplets suspended in a liquid. There is some evidence that for some people, and some people from time to time, liquids that are emulsions can create a sort of transient feeling of thickness or heaviness around the throat area because they are sort of viscous. You know, if you take a glass of water, tip it on its side a little bit, and then bring it back, none of it sort of sticks to the glass, really. Whereas if you do that with milk, you know, tip it to the side and then bring it back, you'll see this residue of milk on the glass for some period of time until it gradually sort of dissipates again. The same thing kind of happens in your throat. So you can get this very transient feeling of stickiness, heaviness, mucusiness that people recognize, and that's absolutely fine. Look, it will go away with time, and it will normally just go away with a glass of water. The reason I sort of caution people about just blanket avoidance of dairy is that direct investigation into this phenomenon has shown that that same feeling of mucusiness, heaviness, stickiness, also is experienced with non-dairy emulsion liquids. So, for example, one direct study that tested this feeling between cow's milk, dairy, and soy milk showed that the people who felt they experienced this heaviness, this stickiness, did so with both drinks. So it's not actually the dairy itself, it's the fact that it's an emulsion, it's the sort of quality of the liquid. And the reason, look, it's no big deal, but the reason I caution is because what will singers often do when they have to sing tonight or rehearse today, they'll go and get their, you know, flat white, their latte, and they'll order it with soy milk or oat milk or whatever, because they think that it'll have a positive effect on this phenomenon. But of course, they're just as likely to experience the same thing with a soy-based drink. Does that make sense? So I feel like, you know, am I personally invested in singers drinking milk? You know, I haven't just opened a dairy farm. I'm not trying to sell anyone a cow. It's not a big deal, but you know, it sort of all plays into this performative aspect of dairy avoidance. But of course, if you're avoiding it for something that's going to have the exact same effect, you're not getting any actual benefit. You're just making the sort of sacrifice for no reason. In terms of sugar, so that was the other thing you mentioned about chocolate specifically. Yeah, look, generally we all consume a little bit too much sugar. Whether it has that much of an impact acutely, I'm not convinced yet. Overconsumption of sugar is more of a sort of long-term phenomenon. We overconsume sugar for a long period of time, you know, months, years, then we start to have negative health effects. It can be pro-inflammatory in the body. Whether it's so pro-inflammatory you would notice acutely, once again, I'm not convinced, but generally speaking, we all consume a little bit too much processed sugar, and consuming less is probably a good idea for most people. Whether it acutely affects your vocal cords, I'm yet to see the effect. I'm yet to see the evidence that that's a thing. It just seems to be something that people say. And then in terms of caffeine, this is another myth. You know, caffeine does not dehydrate you necessarily. There is some impact that, there is some evidence that it has a diuretic effect on the body, a slight diuretic effect. Once again, it varies into individual and also intra-individual. It might affect you one day differently to another. All the evidence that I've read suggests that it's overblown. It doesn't really have although it's a sort of technical phenomenon, it's not so significant that you would notice anything. Yeah, so once again, it seems to be just something that people say. I when I was initially doing all my research into this stuff, the standard singer myths, you will notice that everyone and their grandmother has a sort of, top 10 list, foods to avoid, foods to eat for singers. The truth is most of it isn't really based in anything, any real evidence. People just, it's 2023. People love sharing their opinions on the internet. And the reason I like to caution people against this sort of thing, or just advise people to be mindful or wary of this stuff is, for singers, working singers, we have, relatively high stress job, often lots of travel, often unusual hours, throw into things like jet lag, lack of sleep, colds, flus, now coronavirus. Do we not have enough reasons to be neurotic and stressed out? And if you can free yourself of the shackles of some of these unhelpful myths, like milk's bad for my voice, caffeine's bad for my voice, stuff like that, you've just got a little bit less to worry about. And I think for most people, that's probably a good thing.
I think we've learned anyway, haven't we, from when we notice a little twinge in the body or an ache, if we go to Google and we type in, what does this mean? We'll be told we're going to die next week.
It's cancer, and say goodbye to your loved ones. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's kind of the same advice with, do your research, but maybe these things aren't quite as they seem on the first page of Google.
It's this unfortunate thing of the internet is just the most amazing tool, obviously. But the longer we have it, the more bad information proliferates on there. We're not just talking about nutrition here. And so this sort of now term that gets thrown about of, well, I'm doing my own research. There's layers to that. And if it's just you Google something and you open the first 5 things that come up on the Google search, those are just the most popular things. There's no reason why those might be the most valuable things. So it's just a little caution can go a long way.
Is there any evidence to suggest that there are foods that create more phlegm and mucus that we might want to avoid as singers?
I've looked into this a lot, and it's unfortunately quite a minefield, like in the same way that reflux, foods that exacerbate reflux or mitigate against reflux. Unfortunately, it seems that it is hugely subject to individual variability. So what might sort of cause mucus in me might actually alleviate mucus in you. Same with reflux. Unfortunately, we like these things like top 5 foods to avoid, top 5 foods to eat, but unfortunately it's not necessarily that simple in a lot of cases. In my opinion, from what I've read, and in terms of the best results I've got from patients I've worked with, trying to manage chronic inflammation in the body and also digestive health seems to have the best overall net result for these things, for any sort of vocal health issue that falls into these categories, whether it's mucus or reflux, things like that. We in a modern lifestyle, chronic inflammation is becoming an increasingly significant issue, mainly through stress and the consumption of highly processed foods, a diet that's high in highly processed foods. If we can sort of manage that a little bit, it seems to have a a net impact, not just on overall systemic health, but on these issues that vocal artists often come to us, a singing teacher or someone like myself, someone who works on vocal health, time and time again.
Mm. Mm. Going back to the sugar content of such things like chocolate, how much would we actually have to consume to enter into inflammation?
It 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 does vary, and unfortunately there's sugar and then there's sugar. When I say sugar, of course I'm not talking about an apple or a banana,
Mhm.
um, or some blueberries. I would focus more on things like what we call extrinsic sugars. So sugars that are added to products that wouldn't naturally have that much sugar containing within them. If you have an apple that may have, this is where a lot of people get a bit confused or kind of start to go astray. If I had a large apple with 25 grams of sugar in it, that might sound like a lot of sugar. That's like the same amount as a can of Coke or something like that. But the sugar is contained within this fibrous matrix, which means that the processing and digesting, and therefore the effect of that sugar on your body ends up being very, very different to if you just drink it in a can of Coke or eat a big chocolate bar with 25 grams of sugar.
Mm.
So unless someone has some sort of metabolic pathology, diabetes, type 2 diabetes being the most common one, I think it's not necessary to focus on sugars that are found naturally in foods, but extrinsic sugars we should look at. It sounds quite strict, but I would say if people can keep to under about 25 to 30 grams of extrinsic sugars per day, that would be optimal. That
Mhm.
would be optimal, for inflammation levels, for metabolic health, and for the subsequent issues that we may experience vocally due to that ill health. It unfortunately, I don't like to, it's not poison. I know you might listen to podcasts or videos or read articles that relates to the effects of sugar as being a poison for the body, and I can understand why people say that. I don't think it's helpful to think of it as poison because it's not like botulism or something. It's very different, and we can process very well an amount of even extrinsic sugars, and that's fine. But we all consume too much. And as a general rule, the less the better. But if you can keep it under 30 grams a day, that would be amazing.
Mm. For people who may have an intolerance to dairy, like a lactose intolerance, what might be the vocal impacts of the symptoms that they have if they were to ingest something that would make them react in a certain way?
Yeah, so obviously lactose intolerance is a real thing. It's a genetic. It tends to affect, you could broadly say, non-Caucasian populations more than Caucasian populations. It seems that South or Southeast Asian populations seem to have the most incidence of lactose intolerance. The symptoms tend to be gastric,
Mhm.
so flatulence, or I mean, the vocal impact it will have is it will be embarrassing to be
Yeah.
on stage or in rehearsals, and your colleagues might not like you very much.
You could just pretend
Um,
that you're doing a lip trill.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's good. I feel like that came very quickly to you. Is that something
I've had to
you
use it quite a few
have
times.
used in your? I'll remember to pass that on. Yeah, the symptoms of lactose intolerance are gastric,
Mhm.
stomach upset, and of course, that means you're just not going to sing your best because you're you're uncomfortable.
Mm.
You probably will impact your support mechanism a little bit. So yeah, I mean, lactose intolerance is a separate category. Although related to singing,
Mm.
I think in my experience as a singer, lactose intolerance falls into a very different world to the main reasons I tend to hear singers avoiding dairy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Normally, it's because they think it makes mucus in the throat, which it doesn't.
And if someone is of that belief system that I can't eat chocolate before I go to sing, they learn this, that actually it might not be such a bad thing for you to do, and then they eat it. What part is the brain going to play in changing your mind? Like, are we still going to have that effect of, yeah, but I was told that we shouldn't, so I'm going to feel mucus even if I don't have mucus?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, obviously, like psychosomatic illness isn't so much my, I've sort of read about it a lot, but it's certainly not my um, field of expertise. But once again, like if your first singing teacher 20 years ago told you not to eat chocolate before you sing, I mean, it's not bad advice. I mean, you're not gonna. It's not necessarily going to negatively impact your life. You're not missing out on the benefits of chocolate or whatever. It's just more of it's more of that general thing that I touched on. We don't need these reasons to be neurotic. We have enough of stress and anxiety and worry in a modern context. At least that seems to be what I see
Yeah.
performing artists. And just free yourself. But I'm not advocating that we all eat more chocolate.
Mm.
But yeah, you may have that if because you've avoided chocolate for 25 years, that the eating it's so deeply ingrained that the eating of a piece of chocolate will stress you out and cause you anxiety. Just don't worry about it. Don't eat it. But I think as someone who works in allied health, there's as a physiotherapist and a nutritionist, we're always looking to get to the best distillation of objective truth.
Mm.
So that's the position I come from, because I think that that's what gives us the best results on the grandest scale. So um that's why I'm such a stickler for, like, well, they're actually, I know there's this myth, but there's no evidence for it. So let's focus on stuff that matters.
Yeah. Speaking of truths, I don't really like chocolate all that much. Is it weird?
You're a crisp. We've already determined you're a crisp.
Yeah.
You're more of a, so you're a savory fan, not
I'm
a.
savory, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'll have a piece. I'll have some. I mean, in lockdown, I think I went through 14 bars of Milky Bar. It just came upon me. That's what I needed. But
Okay.
the the idea of taking, more than one out of the Hotel Chocolat or the Quality Street, I can't do it. It makes me feel sick.
Oh wow.
Really?
Okay. There is it was very trendy for a while, about 5 years ago, for people to talk about the chemical effect of sugar, of chocolate,
Mm,
on the brain. And a lot of people, made interesting documentaries or wrote interesting articles about how it can have a similar effect on the brain as cocaine or certain drugs. And there've been experiments that have taken place where they've taken people who were like really addicted to chocolate.
mm,
I forget the specifics of the hormones and the chemicals, because it's not my field, but they gave them a drug that blocked a certain receptor in the brain, and these people were then no longer interested in chocolate. So it showed that actually it wasn't so much the oral sensation, the taste, mouthfeel sensation that they're addicted to. It was the chemical impact it was having on their brain. So you may be someone who's just less receptive to that chemically than other people.
I need that for the other way for crisps
For
then.
crisps, we need to yes.
I'm
I was
up.
going to say lucky you, but like if you have it for crisps, then
In one of your many amazing webinars that you presented for vocal health education, you mentioned that the consumption of the amino acid tryptophan is helpful in the production of serotonin and melatonin. So, firstly, what on earth is an amino acid, and why are serotonin and melatonin important to us as people and as singers?
Yeah. Oh gosh, great question. And I'm so happy that that people have been paying attention to the webinars. I hope anyone who's listened has found them valuable. So an amino acid is the building block of a protein. So if you eat, so there are, I should know this off the top of my head. I'm gonna say
You can
20.
find it if you want.
I'm going to just Google it. Is it 25?
We'll cut this bit out so it looks like you know it off the top of your head.
Ah, 20, 20. Hang on.
You were close.
It's like 11 and 9. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry. I should know that off the top of my head. So amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. Of course, protein being one of the three main macronutrients that we consume: protein, carbohydrates, and fats. We generally associate protein, the macronutrient, as being associated with animal products, steak, chicken, eggs. But of course, it's found in plenty of plant foods as well. Obviously all the beans and legumes and a lot of carbohydrates, oats and rice and bread, and even vegetables have trace amounts of protein. So the amino acids are the building blocks of the protein, and there are 20 that make up the sort of cells of the human body, 9 of which we consider to be essential amino acids. Now, that doesn't mean they're better than the non-essential amino acids, but it means we cannot synthesize them in the human body from other compounds, from other proteins, amino acids. We have to consume them directly, which is why they're essential. It doesn't mean they're better. We can't synthesize them. So that's what an amino acid is. So it's just the building blocks of proteins. In the same way that different types of sugars are the building blocks of carbohydrates, oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, things like that. Tryptophan is one of the amino acids. And what we've found is that it's an essential sort of catalyst, it's an essential sort of building block for the hormones tryptophan and melatonin. Melatonin, of course, is what helps you sort of fall asleep, particularly, that sleep latency. Some people sometimes take melatonin as a synthetic supplement to help them get to sleep. It can be very helpful with jet lag. But of course, you produce it in your body every night when you fall asleep. And serotonin is the sort of feel good, kind of relaxy hormone, sort of somewhat inversely related to cortisol. So what certain studies have sort of deduced and found is that if you are amino acid deficient, protein deficient, particularly this amino acid tryptophan, which is essential to create these two hormones, those people have lower levels of these hormones than is optimal in their body. So one trick, sort of nutritional piece of advice or trick I give people who are particularly highly stressed, finding it hard to relax, finding it hard to sleep, is actually to increase their protein intake generally. It's not like you need to start supplementing specifically with tryptophan, because if you just eat protein, you get enough. And it can sometimes help people with their sleep, and sometimes help people just with their relaxing for hormonal reasons.
And if I'm not wrong, tryptophan is found in some dairy products.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's found. It's traditionally it's found in what people associate with like the Thanksgiving meal. So like turkey, and like things like pumpkin seeds randomly have quite a lot of tryptophan. But one of the reasons that if you after Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving dinner, you kind of feel a little bit sleepy is obviously it's largely because you've just eaten a huge meal and you kind of full and your blood's all in your digestive system. But one of the reasons that contributes to that is this influx of tryptophan for some people, which then helps them produce those relaxing hormones. But yeah, it's also found in dairy products and so forth. It's not one of the things that people need to become, I need to get my 4.3 grams of tryptophan a day. No. If you just up your protein intake, generally, it tends to look after itself.
As well as the work that you do as a nutritionist and as a singer yourself, you have been training to be a physiotherapist. So how is that going for you?
It's been amazing. It's been amazing. I sort of it feels like I've come full circle, because when I was a young man in Australia and sort of unsure of what I wanted to do with my life, just as this musical journey was beginning for me, which then eventually sort of took me to the UK in this kind of whirlwind event. Being a physiotherapist was kind of very much in my mind, going and studying, a master's degree or even an undergraduate degree in physiotherapy. It's quite a big industry in Australia. The whole physiotherapy is a much more outdoorsy, sporty culture.
Mm.
But of course, the sort of option, I ended up following this scholarship I won to come to the UK, study music, and went on that journey instead. And to have the opportunity to come back and sort of scratch that itch has been amazing. It's been amazing. I love the academic study of it. In fact, I'm in the middle of a research project on lower back pain, which I've been sort of seeing participants on that quite a lot recently. And then, of course, I've now coming towards the end of a really fulfilling year working in the NHS in various departments: cardiac rehab, neuro rehab, musculoskeletal. I've just finished at a fracture in orthopedics and a fracture clinic, and it's been a really eye-opening and a fantastic experience, seeing the inside of a hospital, particularly in what is, I think most people understand to be quite a difficult time for the NHS. And I'm very happy to have had that experience.
Mm. In your studies currently, has there anything that's made you ponder something about the singer and their physiology at all?
Yeah, as two things. Obviously, my particular interest is lumbar spinal pathologies, particularly lower back pain and lower back pathologies, the various kinds, bulging discs and torn muscles and spondylosis, things like that. And I'm very, very interested in, and possibly a topic for a PhD one day, the potential impact of diaphragmatic breathing on the treatment of lower back pain.
Mm.
Seems to be that there might be something really valuable there. So I guess that's one for the future. But look, of course, the other one that keeps on coming up, whether I like it or not, particularly as a nutritionist and a physiotherapist, is this idea of body weight and the voice. I'm not so sure it's so prominent in other areas, but sort of like dairy, you need to avoid dairy, things like that. There is this weird sort of remnant of the cultural past of opera that somehow one needs to be overweight to produce an operatic sound. And I'm very interested in if there's any truth to that, what the potential mechanism could be, why it's become so prominent. It's so far, well, I mean, not to give the game away, but so far I can see none, and I've looked. But I'm very interested because it's a sort of, I'm going to call it a myth, that I have heard at every single level of the profession from otherwise very, very knowledgeable people. I heard it when I first started to sing a little bit in Perth, Western Australia. I was told that, if you do too much exercise, won't be able to sing. Why? I'm not sure. I heard it at the Guildhall when I was studying. I heard it at English National Opera, Glyndebourne, all the way to singing roles at the Metropolitan Opera. So it's pervasive. But the more I look, the sort of less evidence I see to support this. Once again, it's not even a hypothesis. People, when you really grill people on it, they don't have a reason that they think it's the case. It's really just a notion. And so a cultural notion, but one that's deep-seated into the culture of particularly classical music. I'm not sure, do people talk about this in musical theatre, or is it?
I think there has been a body weight conversation, especially on the dancer side. I think when Adele lost a bit of weight, there was that conversation of, well, is her voice going to change and that sort of thing. But in terms of contemporary music, I personally haven't had a conversation about whether somebody should have a larger body weight or a smaller body weight. But a lot of people who do mention it talk about Pavarotti.
Yeah, I mean, Pavarotti is an amazing singer.
Mm,
I would say an amazing singer despite
mm,
his weight, not because of it. And of course, the best argument that I seem to come up against is people who want to play a sort of tit for tat game. Well, what about this singer X who was overweight and is amazing? And
mhm,
then you can just go, well, what about this singer Y who wasn't overweight and was also amazing? This is a sort of game of tit for tat that gets us nowhere. And it's, of course, it's quite a low level conversation. What I'm interested in is mechanism. What is the hypothesized mechanism of action? What does adipose tissue around the midsection of the body do that improves vocal sound? And so far, I haven't found anything, in fact. And in fact, fair amount of evidence to the contrary.
mm,
Of course, just to be clear, I realize, because it's body weight is a contentious issue in medicine generally because it's burdened by the baggage of culture. In fact, for my I'm giving a presentation for some of the orthopedic surgeons in a couple of months about body weight stigma and discrimination in orthopedic treatment.
mm,
It's not just in singer world that this baggage exists. It's kind of everywhere. So I understand that the conversation can be challenging and can get confusing because when you start to talk about things from medical principles, people seem to struggle to differentiate the cultural baggage attached to it. But if we can do that, we can have a very open and honest conversation from physiological, medical, scientific principles without any judgment attached to it. I don't have any personal investment in someone else's body weight. It's none of my business. But I'm interested in. Once again, I come back to that. I'm interested in getting to the truth of it, the finest distillation of the truth of the physiology of it.
yeah, absolutely. You mentioned a couple of studies earlier. Are there any other resources that you would advise that we check out on the topic of nutrition or dairy myths or anything like that?
Yeah, it can be tricky because once again, you have to. You can read something on the internet and it doesn't. You don't know the source of it. Obviously, if anyone can develop at least a little bit their scientific literacy, it can really go a long way. And you don't have to go and do a PhD, but just a kind of general understanding of how to read a scientific paper, like something that you'd find on PubMed or even Google Scholar or something, because at least you know that these papers that have gone through peer review, at least you know they've been scrutinized. There's a sort of very, very intense process. I'm going through it right now of ethics and checking and peer checking and all that kind of stuff. That helps distill truth from nonsense. And also, there's just a general. I'm not saying that everyone follows it all the time, but there is an ethos in the scientific methodology of trying to find the truth. You're not trying to prove yourself right. And in fact, proving yourself wrong is as valuable information as proving yourself right. It's all just a quest for truth. And in its finest distillation, of course, the scientific method is run by human beings and we're all flawed. So of course it doesn't always happen that way. But if you look to other sources, particularly now, if it's social media, if it's news reports, I mean, the news journalistic reporting of nutrition is appalling. I mean, it's all people misunderstanding things, people pushing agendas. It's really the quality is terrible, generally speaking. So I wouldn't look to your favorite newspaper for nutritional advice, but yeah, if you can have a basic understanding of at least reading the sort of abstract of a scientific paper, they are more accessible than you think, particularly the more modern ones, because there's a push towards using more accessible writing without too much jargon, particularly in the abstract of a scientific paper. But also, It doesn't have to be me, but if you go directly to someone who does read this stuff as part of their job and is one thing I find, I didn't realize this when I started, but an important aspect of my role, my job, is to disseminate the scientific research, our current best understanding for a lay audience. This is what I try and do in the seminars. This is what I try and do when I do podcasts like this, and this is what I try to do when I see people individually for consultations. So you can get in touch. It doesn't have to be with me, but anyone is welcome to get in touch with me if they like, with someone who's willing to sort of discuss the intricacies of what we currently know in accessible terms. That can be really valuable. But don't go to Facebook and don't go to Twitter, because that's all just corrupted. That, unfortunately, I don't mean it as a conspiracy theory. Like I have a Facebook account, but it's not a quest for truth on social media platforms. It's a quest for almost for conflict and attention and things that don't help us get to the truth.
And where can people find out more about you and get in touch with you if they want to have a consultation?
So for me, the best thing is to go to my website, duncanrocknutrition.com. I also have, if people are interested, various videos and articles that I've written on some of these topics and others. I tend to write on things that come up a lot in my private practice. So obviously, 5 patients ask me the same question. There's probably more people who want an answer to that question. So I'll write on that topic or speak on that topic. Yeah, and through my website, I can be contacted. There's a sort of contact form or my email address on the bottom of every page. And I'm as you could probably tell, I'm a bit of a nerd for this stuff. So I'm always happy to chat about any of these issues. And then, of course, I have a Instagram account where sometimes people contact me through Duncan Rock Nutrition on Instagram. And that's, I love when people reach out, because it's just an opportunity to talk about this interesting and important stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so important also to say that you did some great nutritional videos for us over on the BAST membership. So if you are entering our giveaway today or you have a membership already, you can check those out on there. Duncan Rock, thank you so much. You are now free to go and order a pizza.
I might tonight. I'll see if I've earned it. I'll see if I've earned it. You're free to have some crisps.
Yeah, don't worry. I don't need permission. I've got it.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure.